Okay, welcome everyone. So today we're having a really interesting conversation on pioneering in the 21st century. So I know that when I think of a pioneer, I'll think of like Einstein or like Nelson Mandela. And just to start us off, like when you guys think of pioneering or pioneer, who's the one or two people that you think about and one or two things that you think about?
I think for me, with that question, and some of you probably suspect, but Thomas Sankara is the first person that comes to mind.
Why?
Because I think he pioneered so much, like a new way of leading, a new way of government, throughout a lot of the old things that were kind of linked to the colonial powers and did things differently. So yeah, for me, he's definitely up there.
Yeah. And you guys?
I don't know. For some reason, Alan Bosak came to my mind. I think because he was working within a system that was trying to keep the status quo with regards to separate development, but he demanded that he still stay within that system and yet try and transform it. So I think for me, that's what a pioneer is. Doesn't try to like leave the thing behind, but try and transform it. So yeah.
Does a pioneer always have to be one person in one organization? Because when I think of like the anti-apartheid movement, we'll think of the ANC with Nelson Mandela and not all the other political parties that were also fighting. Because in that moment, pioneering or like a leader looks like one person. What do you think, Brish?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because this individualizing of like pioneers and this like iconicizing, certain individuals is part of a kind of like erasure, right? Because now that we've iconicized this particular person, it actually means that we don't know of other people who are working alongside that person. And I think we've also seen, and I think with like men in particular, people who actively do the work of erasing people who have also done the work of helping them think through ideas. So I really like what your question is probing, because it's an important one in thinking about how like and the implications of that of only having one person and seeing them only as a pioneer, when we know in fact that knowledge production, like the way in which we are able to create and think through stuff is together, right? You aren't the only person who's been thinking about that, and so yeah, I think it's actually a dangerous thing, this idea of only having one person, because more often than not, we've actually seen throughout history how other people are raised, be it like with Thomas Sankara, like we never think of his wife, right? Like, or Nelson Mandela, like there's a deliberate erasure of like women in his life. Or like, yeah, I mean, I think simple things like that, where you're just like, wow, that's quite strange, like to only have one person who's like the iconic figure behind a movement that was working for years for the liberation of many countries, not just South Africa, but many countries. It's quite a strange thing, I think, for me.
Right. And I think it also like it maintains the easily created story, right? So because like even with South Africa, there's the ANC, there was the PAC, there was the UDM, like there were so many other political parties and apolitical parties that were part of the anti-apartheid movement. And I wonder if part of needing there to be one person is to have one leader, like there's someone who's leading us into the end. And then the other part would be, I wonder if it's because there's a threat, if there's more than one leader, it takes away from the pool of focus. If there's four of us who are doing something, it means that the money that we are making is split four ways instead of just with me. And so there's the capitalist individual element to maintaining one person, because having more than one person means that the spotlight is not on me.
I think also a nice example, bringing it back to the church, is Jesus and the disciples, and the intentionality of having 12 disciples. He was leading in a sense, but he was also able to pass it on to the disciples. So there's something about him being a leader, but also the way in which the disciples were led, and how they also in a sense were leading in their own kind of way.
And then his death didn't mean the end of what he was doing, right? Because I think that's the other risk of having one person. When they cease to be there, what then happens to everyone else? Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, actually?
Yeah, I mean, I think so often the way that we view, I guess, the world and like the hierarchization of everything, and even the way that we view God, like the Trinity is even viewed, God in themselves are even viewed as a hierarchy. The picture of Father God, and then Jesus, and then the Holy Spirit at the bottom.
Right.
So I think, that forms a lot of the way that we think about how the church should be run, like the gender dynamic within the church, the way that organizations should be led. So I think until we question and critique that way of thinking, that's why I think our theology is so important. The way that we think about God, and the way that God relates to us as humans, I think actually has such huge implications for everything else that we do. So that the kind of concept, or the way that the word pioneering has been used, fits very well with this concept of God as this masculine front runner man doing this, whatever. So I think even in that we need to kind of decolonize our way of thinking there.
Yeah, it would actually be interesting to see how Jesus, obviously we can go back to the word and see how he related to the disciples, but maybe as a point of reference in how the sense of pioneering or leadership was done with it would be interesting to see how, I guess, to look at that as a point of reference.
And it seems like we are poorer when we think of oneness as just one person, right? And I like the analogy of the Trinity, where it's three distinct beings who are functioning and co-creating and doing this beautiful interaction. But I think we've made the Father central, right? But I would like to imagine the Father doesn't fight for power over the Son doesn't fight for power over the Holy Spirit. That the Holy Spirit is in Genesis 1 in the same way that the Holy Spirit is in when Jesus ascends. And so that we are in fact poorer as people if our thinking is linked only to that kind of thinking. If we only think, because then it discredits who we are, right? And what we offer into spaces as well.
For sure.
And I think it all has to do, Precious, you talked about how these stories are told and who is centered. And so often the way that happens is because of power, and whoever is in power getting the mic or having the pen and being able to tell that story in whatever way they want to, which is almost always a way that upholds their power.
Right.
And so I think the idea of remembering and history and storytelling is so important to critiquing this idea of pioneers, and I think making it more expansive. Because so you said when you think of pioneer you think of Einstein, and that's the typical thing of pioneer. It's a white man,
Right.
And I think that goes along with so many things, the thing of individualism and capitalism and this hierarchization of leadership.
What's the invitation to us then? Says we are Black women who are thinking about the world that we live in now, but also doing the type of work that enables a brighter, meaningful, cooperative, collaborative future. what is the invitation to us then, in how we think about ourselves in the work? Precious, yeah?
Yeah, I really like what Thandi said, and actually it just made me think about something that I've been thinking about a lot. So I just finished watching what is it called again? It's a series, it's a short series on Netflix on the life of Madam C.J. Walker. So she was the first Black woman who created this empire, right? She lived right next to the Rockefellers, and she was selling hair products. And it's really interesting because the way that she comes into this business is actually she steals the idea of this other Black woman, who first, like, I mean, she had used the hair products herself, and she asked this lady, hey, can I sell these? Can I be in business with you? And she said, no, you don't look like me. I don't want you associated with my brand. So anyways, Madam C.J. Walker carries on and she starts her business, and her business thrives, and this woman's business doesn't thrive. And what we see later on in the series is this confrontation that they have, without giving too much of the series. But it just made me think around, like, you know, what if they did work together, right? They could have created something so big. But there is this picture that we have of, you know, of who is a pioneer, who can start things, because that lady never thought that Madam C.J. Walker, you know, would be palatable, in terms of just her looks, right? And so I was just thinking about even how we think about, you know, the first Black pilot or the first Black doctor, and we leave behind people who are in townships and rural areas who are pioneering and doing an incredible work. And so it's very classed, even the way that we're thinking about, you know, this work of being a forerunner. And so I think for me, the invitation really is to also, like, critically analyze the way that I'm seeing the work of pioneering, and where it comes from, and how, you know, we can actually disregard people and the work that they're doing because of, you know, how they speak, where they come from, and what resources they have, because we want a particular kind of story, right? We wow and we are when we hear, like, oh wow, you are the first Black, you know, woman to go to UCT or whatever. And actually I think, I mean, there's value there, but I think there's an erasure because of the way that we're seeing and we imagine what a pioneer looks like and speaks like, and what world they have to kind of fit in, right?
Yeah. Can I actually say something that I love what you're saying, Precious, about Madam C.J. Walker, and actually the kind of stories that we're most attracted to, because it's funny. So I actually also watched that series on Netflix, and I did more research around it because I was fascinated by it. And it's interesting that the actual fact is that there wasn't any animosity between the two women, and actually the woman whom they painted as a villain was actually even more wealthier than Madam C.J. Walker. So it was interesting to me, going back to what you're saying about, like, you know, the stories that we want. Why did they feel the need in that series to pit the Black women against each other? Why is that a more fascinating story? Because because there was no animosity between them whatsoever. Yes. I mean, there is, you know, the thing of, like, she may have stolen that product or that, you know, thing from her, but ultimately they were both two women doing their own thing, going, like you mentioned before, like, you know, we can coexist in the space, but there's a certain something about the stories that we want to tell, or about the society that we live in, that doesn't actually want two Ayandas or two people doing the same thing. So I love how you mentioned that, and I don't know actually what like does it, I feel like that certainly needs also further unpacking, like how can we actually then co-pioneer in the space as Black women doing amazing things, all of us here. How can we actually say, okay, fine, we can coexist together without having to be pitted against each other? We can, like you were saying, build Black tables without having to, I don't know, feel like we have to strip things from each other. Anyway, that was my 2 cents.
And I wonder if that is because, like, the table is small and the resources are small, right? And so, or assumedly, because there obviously is money, there's obviously resources, but within the Black sphere, there's a limit in this resource, and so I want to live well. And I know that if there's two of us, I live half well. and seeing the pool being divided between 2 people, between 4 people, between 6 people, seeing that as a loss to myself, I think is the problem. That at the root of it, we would think that having all of us eat at this table makes me poorer, when actually it should be around what actually enriches how I think, what actually enriches my creativity, my thought pattern, my writing, my pioneering, is having all of us eating at the same time, and that we're not stealing from each other, but actually building a larger table. But I think I really like what you were saying, Precious, about like the rural-urban divide that exists, because like, so there was a commentary that I saw that during the civil rights movement, they were very particular. So civil rights movement in the US, they were very particular about creating the perfect Black story, whether it was MLK, whether it was the lady who sat at the bus, Rosa Parks. Like, she had to be a particular type of class woman, whereby like the Black Lives Matter movement right now is, you're poor, you are living in a Black community. Like, Eric Gardner can be the face of this. Like, anyone can actually be the one whom we're talking about right now, and their class structure, where they come from, their poverty or not, the education level doesn't matter, because ultimately you're Black in this world, and there isn't this need to pander towards the perfect victim, or the perfect solution finder, which I think is also like worth really thinking about, the ways in which we're thinking about pioneering, creating new things as more inclusive, and not as being Black pioneers, don't also fall into the ways in which white people think about pioneering. That we're distinctively moving away from that because we know that we are excluded from it. And so the moment we think about pioneering as one person, we are entering into a system of continuous erasure and exclusion of other people, and for that to not be okay for us.
I'm reminded of that saying, abantu.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But I'm reminded of that because I just think even of the intention with God gifting us in different ways. And we are almost robbed, if we try to do things alone. And the power that comes from, us coming together at a table, sharing giftings and stuff. And how that speaks to the effect or power of whatever is being pioneered, in the togetherness of that.
Why is it easy for us to want to exceptionalize people? So I was reading an article this week of June, actually just like a couple of Black men and women who've started things, right? And I was reading it. I think part of what they were saying was that, like, when we think of the anti-apartheid movement, name who was at the beginning, name who started it. Even with Usesile, like, Usesile started this project, and we are journeying with her. But because there's been erasure, it's important to then name the starters. And so, how do we hold that balance between, don't erase the Black woman who started Black Lives Matter, don't erase the Black women who were running the MK, like, those people are important to name and who they are, and that's real, but also to not idealize them, but also to not glorify them, but also to not exceptionalize them. Because I think there has to be a balance, right? Because if years go by and say Precious or Thandi start something and then we forget her, then it's almost as though we've negated the labor that she's put in, the night that she put in, creating these theories, creating these ideas. What does the balance look like for us right now?
Yeah, so I think two things. I think one, it's really important how we tell stories, because so Cecilia talked about the series that Precious mentioned, where that story was told in a particular way to perpetuate a particular narrative. So it could have been told in a very different way that was actually more true to what actually happened, and then you would have seen that it wasn't this exceptionalization or individualization. So I think that's really important, and also that stories are told from different perspectives, because so I think the June 16 kind of moment and the way that history is told is like a really interesting case in point, because different people claim claim kind of ownership over that moment in interesting ways, and yet if you kind of listen to more stories or read a bit more about it, there's like it's like a very webbed kind of distributed thing that is leading to this thing, and all of these different things are feeding into this moment and precipitating this moment. So I think how we tell stories is really important. And then also I think, I do think people need to be recognized, because otherwise you're just, especially like, I mean, you want to recognize Black women because we've been erased in so much of history and the way that history has been told. But I do think we can also challenge it, because I think we have to recognize that it's the whole system that needs to be challenged. Like, as we're talking about this word pioneer and how that kind of sits within the collective imagination, that feels like this kind of micro thing of this macro thing that needs to be challenged and like rethought. So I think in doing that we need to be holding the tension of definitely giving voice and giving space to people that have been silenced and marginalized, but also creating a different system which critiques the system that loves to individualize and hierarchize.
Right. And to just put a span in the work there, to also think about that in relation to like intellectual property, right? So when we all think about intersectionality, we think about Kimberly Crenshaw. When we all think about Ubuntu, we think about a specific person. So to also hold the sacredness and the time put in by intellectuals and honoring intellectual property as we critique, as we think about it differently.
And rediscovering like collaborative memory. So I just think of the Israelites when they created memory that names people but also allows the unnamed to be named. So people like Rahab are not people that would necessarily be named in today's world because they don't really form the part of the story, but like rediscovering a collaborative memory where everyone is a part of this pioneering into a new space, into the promised land, but also those who are unnamed are now named for the good of the collaboration. Yeah.
It's so important, yeah. Any other thoughts on that, actually?
I think something I've been thinking about a lot, and like not in a weird kind of reductive and cheap way, but it's like even in the way that we're thinking about these projects that we're wanting to pioneer or start, like there's such a huge focus on like the self, right? It's like, I am doing this, I want to be remembered, and there isn't a kind of thinking about the future. And I think as Christ followers, thinking about having an eternal perspective about this work that we're doing, right? Because it's about us. It needs to gratify us, and so I think in terms of continuity as well, we see a lack in that, because even when we're thinking about the work that we're doing, we're not thinking about how is this going to impact future generations, and how is this going to carry on even beyond myself. And I think if we can get to that place where we come to the end of ourselves, really, is when we actually start to imagine something that is so much bigger outside of us. Because I think the focus on the me is what also hinders this kind of collaborative work, right? Because you want to shine, it's yours, your voice must be heard, and it's limiting in the long run. And also I think just for continuity, it's like it doesn't, we can't carry on after you die or after you lose momentum, because it has always been about you. And I think that is quite dangerous, because even like with this is a strange example, even with like inyanga, someone who works with traditional medicine, it's actually known that they keep their recipes to themselves and their methods. They won't even pass it down to their children, because they want to be known as like the best in that particular region. And it's like, why do we do that? Is it not about healing people? Is it, just using this example? And so I think we can even lose sight of that. It's like, you want to be known, but actually, isn't your medication meant to heal people, bring life? And wouldn't it be better if maybe your children knew about how you mix this and mix that, so that you can have more impact? But I think the focus on the self for myself is just like that. It needs to die a quick death.
As you were talking, I'm thinking about the idea of like a moving archive. That I'm like, both of us do history, and it's like there's something important about being a historian, and you go into the archive, you must read the classics, you must read the first people who did these things as you come in. But also when I think of my thesis, I'm like, my opinion only comes in the last chapter, right? Because I spent 4 or 5 chapters talking about what other people have done. And so I think what's been important for me now, and I think as we think about pioneering as Black people in Africa, is to think about the archive as moving, as shifting, as being molding itself, and not being static and not being uniformist. And so then I think then when I pass away, there has to be an entire door open for other people to come and interact with what my thoughts has been, and so forth. So the archive must be moving and gradual and transformative and beyond me, for it to have an eternal view, for it to have a beyond the 21st century view, which I think is what we've missed. And so, I mean, the debates right now in academia around like traditional medicine, when we think about medicine at med school, has been so contentious because medicine must only be these people, and it's a closed medical archive. There's no room for Inyanga, there's no room for Makwele, because they don't belong there. And then it does become an issue of belonging and placement and so forth, which limits our thinking, and also means that our thinking ends and starts with one person. And I think one of the things that I've enjoyed about Black theology has been, Black theology said, okay, I see this Jesus, I see Orthodox, but how about, have you considered this? What about this here? And the gospel has moved in different contexts, and it has to change. It has to be read differently, because my context as a Black woman in Cape Town will never be the same one as someone who's in Doha, will never be the same one as someone who's in Chicago or in Nairobi, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. I think that's also really important to consider as we think about these things.
I think just to go back to Thandi's point about this hierarchical thing, is like, even thinking about discipleship and how we do discipleship, is like there's this and I don't know if this links, so I'm just kind of talking here, but it's just like there's this person who is all knowing, and they are walking with this other person who's a empty, like just a blank, a blank, man.
It's blank canvas. This is the first time you've ever thought about anything. Come, let me do the thing.
You're a baby in Christ.
But also then the thing with that, like I'm recreating myself in you.
Yeah.
It's not about you. Yeah.
And this is why nothing can ever change in the church.
Because we all are created by one person.
This is how the system is set up.
You need to go through the growth
Until
The growth paths and alpha course and
yes.
You need to tick by it before you can.
yeah.
How are you doing your quiet time? Do you listen to Hillsong first, and then you pray? Are you generally, you have to, very methodological.
Yes, yeah.
I've literally heard a church leader say something, it's not exactly this, I don't know the exact quote, but basically, until I'm convinced that you are thinking in the exact same way as me, I will not put you on my leadership team. And this is the setup, right?
Yeah.
You must go through these educational processes of very specific theologians
Very specific
and
commentaries.
very specific commentaries.
Henry or Matthew Henry.
Exactly. And until you conform exactly to that way of thinking, you cannot stand in front and teach anyone anything, because you will lead the congregation astray.
Yeah.
So how does anything change in such a situation?
And differences, disunity as well.
Yeah, differences is anti-Jesus. Differences. I think God is weeding out those who are disrupting the call of God, right? And but yes, which is where were you going to take it?
Yeah, I think for me, I've really benefited from a discipleship model that isn't like on a Friday at 2 p.m. we're having coffee at this coffee shop and we're talking about my problems. But like the discipleship that I've experienced has just been like, hey, let's go shopping. I'm going shopping for my family and we're chatting about whatever. And I'm helping you make a meal. And through that, we're having conversations. You're telling me about your life. I'm telling you about my life. And there's shared learning, right? And I think it takes off the pressure of this discipler to be all-knowing. And to have it together, because it's just like we're doing life together, and that's what it's all about for me. And so I think even as we're thinking about like pioneers and doing collaborative work, and bringing other people alongside us, is seeing the value in that person and being like, wow, I can learn so much from them. I can learn so much from my cousin who lives in Ngobo, and who's working in retail, and they can learn a little bit, from me as well. And I think it's that posture of humility and really seeing everyone as image bearers, really, because I think it's so exhausting, having that one person who's all knowing, and that's why I think that we have such a problem of discipleship, is because it's like, oh shucks, I have to be right, I have to speak a particular way. And then I think it just kind of links to this idea of like this eternal perspective, because we've made it so much about like us. We've personalized and individualized it, and have lost sight and focus of like what is at stake here. And it's limited our way of doing things.
And going back to what you were saying about like, in America, there was a particular Black story that they wanted, so precious. And like, even you, Precious, what you're saying about like the way people speak, I wonder if it's not because like we're pioneering for the sake of, or we want to compare ourselves with what white people are doing, right? We're not pioneering for Black people, for us. We're pioneering so that we can also make it into those white books or into those white, so that we can be put up, she's the first Black person to do this, right? As the sign always says, the Black unicorn, we want that status. We're not being pioneering for the sake of. And so that's what, like, that for me is the thing. Like what is the purpose of our pioneering? Like, are we pioneering just so that I can be the popular person there who's seen as, or are we joining together for a particular collective like future or something? Like, I wonder. I don't know.
There's something that Thandi said that I think is so important and when we're talking about the discipleship, is that how then do things change, right? So I think if we are thinking about pioneering around changing institutions, changing thoughts, because the institutions that we're changing, we're not changing them because we are change makers. No, it's because they're unjust, it's because they exclude, it's because they are capitalist, it's because they exploit. And so then we have to change them. And so I think what you're saying, Thandi, is so important to say that we are pioneering a new way of pioneering, #Thandi, so that we can change, so that we can have more people at this table and actually just like burn the table down and actually just like sit on a mattress, and just like have other imageries. And so that's why we have to do it differently. That's why we have to think about pioneering differently, because it's not about us. And while it's nice to be the first Black, while it's not like the stature that comes with being the Black unicorn is so bougie, like, welcome to our circle, but that's not the end for us. The end is to have all of us sit here comfortably, all of us to live well. And I think our pioneering has to be uncomfortable with the status quo. If our pioneering feeds into what already exists, that isn't pioneering, that's colonial. And we're not trying to be colonial, because colonialism comes and pioneers Jesus as though he hasn't been here. colonialism comes in and says there's a blank canvas in Africa, let me paint God, as though for the centuries before God hasn't been doing things with us. And so if we walk in as new people, we're not only isolating ourselves as a pioneer, but we're erasing centuries of what God has been doing amongst people, erasing centuries amongst people who've been thinking about these things before us. And so we can't do it the same way. It doesn't serve who we are creating ourselves to be as well. Yeah. If someone is listening to this talk and they're wondering why is this important today, what would you say to them?
At first he said, and it's a Xhosa. I wouldn't say it in English.
First of all,
Firstly, ndingathi kubo.
Ndingathi kubo, stop. Because no one.
Because not everyone is included, and we need a change of status quo to find inclusion. So, I mean, let's change.
We need voices that people can relate to in this context, and we haven't heard in a while.
Yeah.
We've never heard anything, so we need more voices to help us in our processes as they relate to our context. Yeah.
Agreed.
Precious, you were gonna say something.
No, Thami, I didn't quite hear what you said.
Siswam, I was just saying we need more voices. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Testing.
We need more voices. We need people that look like us that are speaking, so that we're able to have a reference point that connects to our context. Yeah.
I think I would say to someone, if what you're doing today is excluding someone, then you might have to reconsider how you're doing it. So reconsider your methodology, reconsider who you're thinking alongside with. And even when you're including other people, if you're including them for just including them to be tokens, do it differently because you are patronizing them.
Yeah, I think I would say it's gonna be viewed by people. This is so wrong. I think we need new ways of seeing and knowing the world. Because this is exhausting. How we're living is unsustainable. And I think also most importantly, the glory of God is at stake.
Yeah, sure.
And how we see the world today and how we relate to people is isn't reflective of his vision, right? And so I think for me the push is like, the person of Jesus Christ modeled something so different, and in fact there is something more and bigger for us. So we are living lives that are bigger and beyond ourselves is important.
Yeah.
Thank you, friends.
it's a wrap. How did you think?
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.